tired. It's been a long Zoom day. Be helpful.
I just wanted to ask about I don't know, I was reading through some literature relating to the Framingham Heart Study, and I saw you and your colleagues' paper, so I just wanted to reach out to some researchers. I reached out to a few others, just talking about, I don't know, just the data set overall,
Mhm.
like what its limitations are, whether it's too little data, some of the data is unusable, or it's not validated for diverse populations, that kind of thing.
Okay.
Just
So I can talk for about 15 minutes, and that's a lot of different questions, and I'll try to take them one at a time. In terms of the strengths of the data set, it's one of the oldest continuous epidemiologic cohort studies in the world, and the participants have been examined. The first set of participants have been examined since 1948 till the present. We have very few of the original cohort left, and subsequent generations have been recruited since that time. I'm going to share my screen if that's okay.
go ahead. I think I
You've
have
disabled
to.
it.
Let's see. Okay, I changed it to all participants. I think that should work.
Let me try again to see if that will work. There we go. Okay. So here you can see, I don't know if you ran across this on the website, but this is our exam, our participants. When the first ones, the original cohort started coming in 1948, and it was both men and women, which was fairly unusual at that time. And they've been followed to the present. There are there are very few that are still alive at this point because of how old they are. We recruited the children of the original cohort and the children's spouses in the 1970s. And you can appreciate the mean age was 36 at that time, and they're now older adults in their 70s. Around 1994, it was appreciated that the town of Framingham back in 1948 was not diverse. It was largely people of European ancestry, whites. And yet the town of Framingham now is much more diverse. And so there was a recruitment of a multi-ethnic cohort at that time that was about 10% of the offspring cohort. And it's a mix between people that are the ethnicities and races in the Framingham area, which would be Hispanic, African American, and Asian. So that's the ethnic racial composition of that cohort. And then we have the third generation and another cohort, multi-ethnic cohort, which I recruited, the Omni Cohort 1, which was recruited again at the same time as the third generation. It was about 10% because that was about the relative prevalence of ethnic racial minority people from underrepresented groups back in when I recruited them in 2003. So one of the big limitations of the Framingham study is that it does not reflect the ethnic and racial diversity of our country at this point, which is about 32, 33% people that, from a variety of races and ethnicities. Um, so that's a limitation. Some of the other National Heart, Lung, and Blood cohort studies have recruited racial and ethnic diverse individuals. We have a collaboration with people at the Jackson Heart Study, which is in Jackson, Mississippi. And that's a all African American cohort. In terms of the quality of the data, the data is collected in a very rigorous, standardized fashion. So it offers some advantages to the type of study that you would do in a hospital where people would come and get testing because they've got diseases. And the protocols are not as rigorous and well worked out as the protocols in Framingham.
Let's see. I guess then another question is now not relating to this, and if you know, what are the limitations of like previous research and some things to avoid when trying to come up with new projects, kind of. There's things that should be avoided.
In terms, I just want to make sure I understand your question. Do you mean in terms of if you were going to start a new cohort study or if you were going to propose a study in Framingham?
Or, let's see. Could you repeat your question?
I just want to make sure that I'm understanding your question. And are you asking if I was to go out and start a whole new cohort study like a Framingham or a different cohort, what would be the things to avoid in that situation? Or are you
The
asking?
limitations of the previous research that used the Framingham Heart Study.
Oh, okay. Um, Well, whenever the Framingham Heart Study, as you probably have figured out, having downloaded BioLink, is really a very, very complicated data set. Because there's so many different variables. There's so much data collected over so many years that it's very complicated. And I have to be honest with you, I do not do my own analyses. I work with a statistician and a data analyst that does the analyses because it's so complicated. My area of expertise is understanding clinical medicine and understanding epidemiological questions, but I don't actually run the programs. The kinds of problems that people can get into is using the wrong statistical tests. That's one problem. Another problem is whenever you have a data set, there is missing data. And how do you analyze and account for missing data? That would be another problem. Another problem would be that the participants are related. So they're typically, when many statistical tests are set up to under the assumption that the observations are distinct or independent. But because the participants are related, there's a correlation. For instance, if my sibling were in the Framingham Heart Study and I was in the Framingham Heart Study, my body habitus is, fairly normal weight and normal to a little on the tall side. So we would already have, and if my sibling were in there, we would have similar body habituses. And so you need to deal with the fact that they're not truly independent observations.
Okay. Let's see. Would you know what kind of augmentations or additions were made in putting the data set together? So like relating to how the data was collected, or just like any information that you have.
So one of the things that was done in BioLink is that some of the extreme observations were truncated because if you're a certain age and a certain very extreme, like if you were extremely tall or extremely obese, that person potentially could be identifiable, if that makes sense. And so some of the most extreme observations have been brought in or what we call truncated in BioLink. I don't know if that answered your question.
What do you mean by most identifiable?
Well, for instance, if there was an observation, just say there was somebody was 7 feet tall in the Framingham data set. There probably are very few people that are 7 feet tall in Framingham, Massachusetts. And so if you included that extreme amount of data, the person would be identifiable. And one of the issues with Framingham is that it's very important to protect participant confidentiality. People are very generous. The Framingham participants are among the most generous human participants in research. They've been coming to the heart study for 7 decades or 5 decades, and so they don't come thinking that they will be identified. They come to contribute to science, and so we have to really protect their data.
I understand. I was just a little unsure about what you meant initially.
No problem.
Do you think you could talk a little bit more about how the data set has helped contribute to the way we treat cardiovascular disease and just those kinds of diseases in general?
Yeah, so interestingly enough, um, the head of the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute just published a study, I think in the New England Journal, if I'm not mistaken, and literally one of the couple of the top findings that have happened over the last 50, 60 years in research come from the Framingham Heart Study. One of the most interesting phenomena is just even the term risk factor was coined by Framingham investigators. Dr. Bill Cannell published a seminal article talking about factors of risk and risk factors. And so he actually even coined the expression. Some of the most important observations out of Framingham have been recognizing what are risk factors and how can we actually predict cardiovascular disease. So I'm old enough to have trained in an era, I'm a physician, where we used to talk about heart attacks or cerebrovascular accidents, which now we call myocardial infarctions and strokes, because they're not random, it's not like one gets smoked down by God with a heart attack or a cerebrovascular accidents. Many cardiovascular conditions are predictable and preventable. And that's
Right.
been one of the major contributions of Framingham.
Okay. Yes. Okay. So do you have any other, I don't know, information that you could provide about the data set? Or is it
Well, the main thing is just it's really extraordinary, the generosity of the participants and the researchers that work there understand that they propose studies and they conduct studies, but that the data doesn't belong to them. So I've worked weekends and evenings writing grants to be able to write, to be able to collect data and write papers. But at the end of the day, we put our data into BioLink or into dbGaP because the data doesn't belong to me, Emilia Benjamin. The data belongs to the world. The data belongs to the participants to make the most scientific discoveries and to generate the most science as possible. And that's why the data is in BioLink.
okay? With that, I don't think I have any more questions, and it's been about 15 minutes.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you very much. I really wish you the best of luck. Good luck to you in your studies.
Yeah. Thank you for your time.
Take care.